All right. We are on.
Okay, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this, but one of the things that you guys pointed out, or some of you pointed out in your essay questions on the quiz, was what was the difference between Federalists and the Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans. I told you you had to have one issue that was different. And a handful of people pointed out that Federalists favored a strong military, and Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans didn't want a large military because they were afraid it could lead to a dictatorship. However, due to circumstances in the world, and in this case, it happens to be something known as the Barbary Coast Pirates or the Barbary Coast. It's the northern coast of Africa. It was a group of people, for lack of a better way of describing it, that essentially had told the U.S. if you don't pay a tribute or bribe, we're going to attack and take your ships. And it was around the Mediterranean, so it was an important trading area. We decided we weren't going to pay. They did attack and take our ships. And Jefferson, the reluctant warrior, does send a group of Marines. They attack. A battle ensues. It's really one battle. It takes a while because the Marines are going through North Africa. They're building up an indigenous force. Long story short, they convince the guy's brother, who's the leader of the Barbary Coast, to help him, and they kind of overthrow him. But in the process of the battle, we end up burning down our own ship because we were afraid they were going to use it against us. And we pay $60,000 to release the captured Americans, and that's kind of the end. There really isn't much more to it than that. The significance in American history isn't the war itself. It's that even the Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans realized that although we don't need to have a massive military, we do need to have one that's sufficient in protecting our, trade worldwide. So here's the Barbary Coast. You can see the countries that it composes today. This is a burning of the ship. All right, this is the big thing, okay? We're going to talk about the Louisiana Purchase. It's going to be kind of the theme for today. So there's a lot to write here. I don't think you need to write down Napoleon Bonaparte again here, but he convinced the King of Spain to give Louisiana the land area to France in 1800. And so now the French control it. The last time we talked about it, the Spanish had signed a treaty with the United States allowing us free access, and now the French control it. And I told you from time to time, different countries would control New Orleans, which is, of course, the gateway to the rest of the world from the interior of this country via the Mississippi River. So it's a very important area. Not wanting to fight Napoleon in France and Western America, and keep in mind this is at a time where Napoleon is, making designs to take over the world. I shouldn't say the world. That's probably an exaggeration. But he is taking over large chunks of Europe. Jefferson sent James Monroe to join Robert Livingston in Paris in 1803 to buy as much land as they could for $10 million. Napoleon decides to sell all of Louisiana and abandon his dream of a new world empire for two reasons. Okay? And sometimes you've heard the old saying, it's better to be lucky than good. This is really timing. It's a timing thing. There is an uprising in Santo Domingo. The French are going to be embroiled in a very long and bloody struggle, basically in the Caribbean. And we talked about this a little bit in world history. Anybody remember where this big uprising is? Led by the Santo Domingo. Anybody from world history? It's a country that has a lot of economic issues today. It's really the only successful slave uprising ever. The Haitian Revolution. Okay, in Haiti. Nope. That's all right. Anyways, all of that is draining resources from Napoleon, and he's become frustrated. And he had, at one point in time, considered potentially attempting to take over large chunks of North America, but it's not going to work out. Right? He shifts directions. Because Britain controls the seas, Napoleon didn't want Britain to take over Louisiana as well. So selling the land to America removed this possibility. And it gave Napoleon much needed cash. Wars are expensive. Napoleon is fighting wars on multiple fronts. He needs money. He also hoped giving the land to America would help make America a world power. This would also be a disruption to the British. And he's right. That gamble pays off because as the fighting continues in Europe, the United States is going to take advantage of that in 1812, and we're going to declare war on the British, assuming that they are going to continue fighting the French and that they would be too preoccupied with that and that we would be able to take parts of Canada. Unfortunately, our military was still so weak that it didn't quite work out the way we had hoped. And then the British and the Prussians and the Austrians essentially defeat Napoleon at Waterloo. And then the British can send all of their troops over here, and it doesn't work out real well for us. But what Napoleon was thinking here was right, okay? He thought that if the Americans could control that we too could emerge as a potential world power and be a disruption to the British, which would actually enable his plans to succeed. Maybe you shouldn't be on your phone right now. All right, so Robert Livingston, along with James Monroe, they negotiated for Louisiana land area, signed a treaty on April 30th, 1803, ceding Louisiana to the United States for $15 million. The Americans had signed 3 treaties and gotten much land to the west of the Mississippi, 820,000 square miles at 3 cents an acre. This becomes known as the Louisiana Purchase. What I want to point out as you're writing, just listen to me talk, is they were authorized to spend $10 million, but they spent $15 million. And this creates an interesting situation because the Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans do not favor strong central government, correct? They want more power to the states. They're going to make a strong central government move here. They're not authorized to do this, to pay that extra $5 million. And according to their party platform or their beliefs, they shouldn't be able to do this unless they have the consent of Congress. But it's such a good deal. It's like a no-brainer. It's like you go somewhere and you're going to buy, I don't know, whatever it is. Let's say you want to buy a pair of jeans, right? And you saved up $50 for these jeans, and you go to the store and they're going to give you 3 pairs of jeans for $55, same ones. Like, not that you need 3 pairs of jeans, but let's just say you do. It's a no-brainer. Like, yeah, you almost have to do it. Yes, it's a little bit more money, but you get so much more than what you were originally asking for. And so they do it, and then they come back and ask permission. And so it is kind of a big central government move, would be what we would say a little bit more of a federalist move. But it made sense. Now we have to figure out what's out there. And that will begin the exploration of the Louisiana Purchase. And probably the 2 most famous individuals involved with that are Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, become known as the Lewis and Clark Expedition. And they will explore Louisiana Territory. For $1 million, name the river that was the focal point of their exploration. In other words, what river did they travel through to explore the Louisiana Territory? And keep in mind, for all of you watching on TV, these are high-level students. They should know this answer.
Mississippi.
It
Not that easy.
empties into the Mississippi River. Say it a little louder. It's the Missouri River. Okay, they will travel up the Missouri River. Okay, and the Missouri River, of course, doesn't encompass the entire Louisiana Purchase, but it's a pretty good chunk of it. And that will be kind of their focal point of their exploration. They'll explore the lands around the Missouri River. And where the Missouri River and the Mississippi River meet is often referred to as the gateway to the West. When they explore this territory, and don't quote me on these numbers, but just to give you an idea of how good these guys were back in the day, it's something called dead reckoning. They're trying to estimate distances, because they don't know how long it is. There isn't a map that's made of it that says this is a mile, that's 2 miles, 3 miles, whatever. And so they used a process called dead reckoning, and a lot of explorers did this, or surveyors. As they went up the river, they would look ahead to an object. There's a big rock in the river, and they'd say that's like 100 yards. And they write that down in a journal, and they would keep adding distances. Okay, they reach that rock. That big fallen tree is 400 yards, and they're adding it up because they're trying to figure out like distance traveled, how far they went. And there's a documentary made about the Lewis and Clark expedition, and I've gone back and checked it, and they go through the journals, and the exploration up that river, like their dead reckoning was not 100% accurate, but I would say it was within like 90%. And again, don't quote me on those numbers, but it was unbelievably good. Like just adding up, I don't think I could add it up if the football fields were marked out and I had to walk across 10 of them. I don't think I could remember if it was 9 of them or 10 of them. And these guys were just going up. That's 400 yards. That's 300 yards. And they're adding that up as they're going up and exploring the river. And not just exploring, but obviously encountering some of the Native Americans, some of the animals. Imagine seeing a bison for the first time, some of the different plant life. So all things that they hadn't necessarily seen before. So it's a big moment in U.S. history. It virtually doubles the size of the United States. Anybody want to guess who that is? World history. Remember, again, these are high-level students. I literally said his name. No. Remember I said the French couldn't come because of a slave revolt? It was led by the Cont Overture, the only successful slave revolt on the island. I shouldn't say it, but most major. Now, who is this? Yeah, it's William Clark. Can't remember what this was exactly. This was part of the Lewis and Clark expedition. I think it was the medal that was given to Lewis and Clark. Peace and friendship. This is the other side. All right, so here it is. All right, there's the Missouri River. Eventually, they obviously don't know this, but they're going to encounter the mountain range, the Rockies up here. They're going to have to try to find a pass through it. That's not always easy. Work their way through. They'll make their way down to the Oregon coastline. They'll stay there for a little bit. They'll come back. They'll split up for a little, explore around. Again, looking for a better pass through the mountains, get back into the Missouri River. All right, I said we would talk about this a little bit later. Aaron Burr, Jefferson's first term vice president. After being dropped from Jefferson's cabinet, he joined a group of extremist Federalists who plotted the secession of New England and New York. And again, that obviously starts to be uncovered during the War of 1812. It leads to the death of the Federalist Party. Hamilton uncovers the plot. I told you he writes a newspaper editorial, really questioning Aaron Burr and what he's up to or what he's doing. Burr challenges Hamilton to a duel. Hamilton accepts his. Hamilton refused to shoot, and he was shot and killed by Burr. Okay. So we talked about the story a little bit yesterday. I didn't get into it in very much detail. But the point of it is, it really stems from this accident by the Electoral College voters where they accidentally made a tie between Burr and Jefferson. Because at that time, according to the Constitution, if you came in first place, you were the president. If you came in second place, you were the vice president. But they were still running. Jefferson was running to be president, and Burr was running to be vice president. But that's how it was supposed to work. And the Electoral College voters were supposed to communicate and say, you vote for Jefferson, and then we're going to make sure he has one more vote, and then Burr's going to come in second. Because Adams was running against them. And so if they literally divided it up, it would have been Jefferson president and Adams vice president, who was a Federalist, right? And they realized that wouldn't work either, but that's how the Constitution was written at that time. Well, in their communication, they miscommunicated and accidentally created a tie of 73 Electoral College votes. But once they do that, there is no taking it back. That's the election now. Those are the election results. It's 73 to 73. Adams is certainly out, but it has to go to the House of Representatives. And in the House of Representatives, although Hamilton and Jefferson were political opposites, Hamilton stands up and says, Jefferson is the person you should vote for because he is the person that was running to be president. And that deeply offends Burr. And then this happens as well. And all of it leads to this tension between Hamilton and Burr. And if you've seen Hamilton the musical, you could even say there's an underlying sense of jealousy between Burr over Hamilton's success. How much of that is real and how much of that is staged. I'm sure it's at least partially true. And it leads to this duel in which Hamilton is killed. Burr kind of goes off the deep end. So this General James Wilkinson, he was a corrupt military governor of the Louisiana Territory. He made an allegiance with Burr. They were going to separate the western part. So this plot gets found out. So Burr leaves, and then he wants to separate the western part of the United States from the east and expand their new confederacy with invasions of Spanish-controlled Mexico and Florida. He basically wants to make himself the king of West United States, or I don't even know what they were going to call it. Ultimately, in the end, the plot falls apart. Betrayed. Jefferson finds out about the plot. He is brought to trial on treason, which is exactly what he was doing. He was plotting against the United States. However, he is acquitted. He's found not guilty. Burr, although maybe a little bit, we're going off the deep end a little bit, is still pretty legally adept. And in the Constitution, it says in order to be charged with treason, you have to have two witnesses against you, two people willing to testify and say that's what you were doing. And that doesn't happen. And as a result, then, Burr is acquitted. But he kind of disappears at that point. I think he travels around Europe a little bit and still tries to maybe conspire against the U.S. a little, but as far as his impact on U.S. history, he's gone. His biggest impact is killing Alexander Hamilton. All right, so we have this precarious neutrality. Jefferson is reelected in 1804, capturing 162 electoral college votes. His Federalist opponent, Charles Pinckney, only received 14. What that shows us is the Federalist Party is certainly, and I brought this up yesterday as well, is continuing to lose touch with the average American. Right? They don't appeal to the average American at all. And it's getting further and further away, and these other things are going to happen. You know, what you saw before is a little out of chronological order. They're going to happen after this. The Federalist Party is becoming more and more desperate. England was the power of the seas, and France had the power of the land. So the English Navy kind of ruled the seas, and the French army was really ruling most of mainland Europe. England is going to issue a series of orders in council in 1806 in which they closed European ports under French control to foreign shipping. They're attempting to strangle France, right? Because Napoleon is being so successful on land, they think the only way they can stop him is to stop any other imports from coming into the country of France. And even though it's early in world history in relative terms, France does rely on foreign imports. And so they're trying to stop them. The French, on the other hand, ordered the seizure of all merchant ships that entered British ports. So in other words, if the French were able to capture via land a British port, they were going to take every ship they could. And so the United States is getting caught in the middle here. Does that make sense? You know, we're being told can't enter a French port, and the French are saying if you enter a British port and we capture it, we're taking it. So literally, we can't win. And we have this thing known as the Chesapeake Affair, in which a royal ship attacked the U.S. frigate, the USS Chesapeake, after the Americans refused to return 4 alleged British deserters. Now, whether they were actually British deserters or whether they were Americans who had been impressed into service is still questioned. What the British would do is sometimes in going to these port cities around the world, and they needed a few more sailors, they find the nearest American in the bar, they knock him in the back of the head, they drag him out to the ship, they set sail, he wakes up and they say, you got 2 choices. You're either a British sailor or you're a really good swimmer. They became British sailors, and oftentimes they would sail for the British until they got close to another port, and they would get out, try to find the nearest American ship, try to find their way home. So whether these guys were actually British and deserters or whether they were Americans who had been impressed into service is still a little bit debated. But again, we have the British attacking an American ship. All right, and it's really because our military is not very strong. So again, even the Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans realize that we can't function having, a tiny navy. We're just going to. All right, so we'll create some things to try to battle this. And Jefferson passed something known as the Embargo Act, and I underlined obviously a lot here because there's a lot to go through. It banned the exportation of any goods to any countries. I want you to think about that for a second. Can you imagine if we did that today? I mean, obviously global trade is much more ingrained in the American economy, but even then, who's it going to hurt? Which political party relies on trade? Federalists or Democratic Republicans? Reminder, these are upper level students. The political power base of which party is made up of wealthy merchant traders? Federalists, okay? So this hurts the Federalists, like significantly. Basically just said, there is no more trade, right? The Democratic Republicans, they want to be self-sufficient farmers. Now, it's going to hurt them too, because believe it or not, they're also involved in trade. But Jefferson planned to force France and England, who both depended on American trade, to respect America and its citizens. who had been killed and captured by both countries. The embargo significantly hurt the profits of U.S. merchants and was consequently hated by Americans. Okay, it obviously has a dramatic effect on the Federalists, but it will also hurt the Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans because those farmers too, not as heavily, but certainly rely on some trade. The act was repealed in 1809, so within 2 years. And Jefferson's logic it kind of makes sense. He's saying, listen, if you're going to keep taking our ships, then we're not coming. We can't defend them, and we don't want to start a war yet, so we're just not going to go. However, it became such an economic nightmare in this country that he's forced to get rid of it. So then they created the Non-Intercourse Act, which opened up trade to every country except France and Britain. That will be a little bit better, but the reality of it is the two major countries in the world to trade with are France and Britain. The embargo failed because Jefferson overestimated the dependence of Britain and France on America's trade. Britain was able to trade with Latin American republics, and France had enough land in Europe to support itself. So it was a failure. There's really no other way to describe it other than to say it was a failure. So this is a political cartoon. It's a prairie dog with Jefferson on it. And the point of it is basically that the United States is just coughing up money, being stung by the French, and basically, held ransom by the British. Again, it was kind of critical, not kind of, it is critical of Jefferson. U.S. shipping again, we're trying to expand, trying to build more merchant ships. Obviously, we talked about expanding the Navy. All right. James Madison becomes president on March 4th, 1809. Congress is going to issue Macon's Bill number 2. All right, this is considered Madison's gamble. It reopened American trade with the entire world. So more profits starting to come in, boost to the economy. But it had a clause stating that if Britain or France repealed its commercial restrictions, then the U.S. would reinstate its trading embargo against non-repealing countries. Napoleon convinced Madison to give Britain 3 months to lift its orders in council. Okay? Remember, those orders essentially said that if an American ship went into a French port, they could seize it. And Napoleon convinces Madison to give them a 3-month deadline to change that. And I told you a long time ago that one of the reasons the War of 1812 happens is because of the British continuing to seize our ships. And so now we put an ultimatum on. You need to stop taking our ships. You have 3 months to agree to that. Madison did that. Britain chose not to lift its orders in council. Britain had to reenact the United States trade embargo, but this time just against Britain. Most people believe Macon's Bill number 2 leads directly to the War of 1812. The American population is so frustrated with the British. And remember, the Federalist Party is continuing to lose control. They were the biggest British supporters. The Democratic Republicans are gaining more and more control and more traction. And this tension with Britain is kind of boiled over. Now, that's highlighted on the bottom because that too links to the War of 1812 video, but that's what you'll be, the first part you'll be watching. So this is the British and the French carving up the world. I need to look at, I just want to see one thing here. Okay. 2 slides left. Usually I kind of stop here and then we watch the War of 1812 and then we come back and finish it. But I think just for the sake of getting your notes done, we'll just finish these up. And you can watch the War of 1812, excuse me, tomorrow and Tuesday. The 12th Congress met in 1811. The War Hawks wanted to go to war with the British. So that's a new term in there. We're going to hear this again. What's the bird that's associated with peace?
Dove.
Doves. So you'll hear hawks and doves. War hawks wanting to go to war. Tecumseh, and I'm going to struggle with this one, so Tenskwatawa, were Shawnee brothers who unified many Indian tribes in a last-ditch battle with the settlers allied with the British. Okay, Tecumseh is a tremendous leader within the Native American community. He brought all these tribes together. They were actually quite successful. They had allied themselves with the British. The Native Americans could see this western push of Americans. They wanted to stop it. Tecumseh was good, and he brought everybody together. He said our only chance to stop him is to fight as one big, unit, so to speak. Unfortunately for them, Tecumseh is killed at the Battle of Thames, and then the tribes all split apart again. And when the tribes are split apart, they're fairly easily defeated by the American army. When they're together, they're a very formidable force. When they're split apart, it's much easier. And so that really kind of ends what we would consider the biggest threat on the frontier of the United States. William Henry Harrison was the governor of Indiana Territory. He defeated the Shawnee at the Battle of Tippecanoe. There's going to be I think it's a political campaign that says something like William Henry Harrison at Tippecanoe too, or something like that. They use that later on. The prophet, by the way, is referring to Tecumseh's brother. Supposedly he could see things. He was blind, but he could see things. He had visions of what the future would hold. It's the Battle of Thames. All right, on June 1st, 1812, Madison asked Congress to declare war on the British. The Democratic Republicans who supported the war, aka the War Hawks, felt the country had to assert American rights to the world. They also want Canada. All right, that's the little caveat. They want Canada. And they think Canada is ripe for the taking. They think the Canadians are going to welcome them with open arms, because we're going to free them from the British. The reality is the Canadians actually fight us, and this ends in I would say, relatively a failure. The Indian stronghold, the Indians were being armed by the British to attack the settlers. Federalists are opposed because they supported Britain. They believed Canada was too agrarian. So I'm going to ask you again, what does the word agrarian mean? Agrarian means you make your money off of what? Agriculture, okay? And so obviously, if the Federalists think that Canada is too agrarian, they think it's just going to be more Democratic Republicans, because the vast majority of the support for Democratic Republicans comes from farmers. So it'll end up giving more votes to the Democratic Republicans. Ultimately, the Federalist area of New England would lend more money, think about this, and send more food to the British Army than the American Army. Again, this is why the Federalist Party dies. It becomes branded as the party of traitors. But the people in New England were, at one point, the hotbed of the Revolution. 70% of New England citizens wanted their independence from Great Britain. And now it gets flipped in what is sometimes referred to as the Second War of Independence. The War of 1812. present state of our country, right? We have all kinds of things pulling at the columns that are holding up liberty, independence. And there's our chronology. Any questions? So tomorrow and Tuesday, we'll be watching War of 1812 Part 1 and Part 2. So you guys will actually be in here on Tuesday, so we'll just watch Part 2 in here. And just a reminder that you have, next week is Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So for you guys, nothing really changes. It's still Tuesday, Thursday. But there is regular class on Friday for next week. All right, let's see if I can do this without losing the final 10 minutes again.